What's going on, guys? I'm Frank at Ratchet and Frank TV, and while we wait for the parts for our 650, let's turn our attention towards the shop a little bit and make an 8-foot steel top bench. First thing I had to figure out was how big I could realistically make this thing. Now, I wanted it to run the remainder of my shop's wall and also be wide enough to fit tools and machines on. So I came to the conclusion of a length of about 8 feet and a width of just over 2 feet. I'll be using 1/4 inch angled steel for the frame of the workbench and then a 1/4 inch steel plate on the top. I wanted the workbench's height to be at a level that it's comfortable enough to sit at with a high chair as well as work at just above waist level. I decided 40 inches was going to be my height. For a lot of my cutting, I'm going to be using a brand new Milwaukee cutoff saw with a 14-inch abrasive disc. This thing makes pretty easy work of this 1/4 inch angled steel, but to be honest, I don't feel like I would be comfortable cutting thicker than 1/2 inch on this. The key with these saws is to take it slow and let the abrasive disc do most of the cutting. You don't want to apply too much force, as you could actually damage the saw's motor and, even worse, blow the disc up. You should let the disc follow all the way through too to its maximum travel point, so you could get a good clean cut on the side of the material you're working with. These are what the dimensions of the workbench look like actually on the floor. Now we could actually start tacking this thing together. With some extra 1/4 inch angled steel that I had, I made little boots that'll go on the ends of the cross members that connect to the front of the workbench. This was done to ensure that the workbench is level on my garage floor. I'm going to use welding magnets to hold my first angle while I put my tacks down. I like to do 4 just to ensure that it resists all forms of twisting and pulling. I'm using Fleet Weld 180 3/32 rods at around 60 amps to do my tacks. You can see there's actually a piece of metal to my left that I was going to use to protect the wood on my side. I actually forgot to move it into place before I started welding, so you know what they say, do as he says, not as he does. Whenever we're welding inside, we want to make sure that we have good ventilation as well as proper equipment in the case of a fire. I'll now swap over to Fleet Weld 180 1/8 inch rods at around 90 amps to do my first welds. In hindsight, I probably could have held my electrode on the welds a little bit longer and I would have gotten a better penetration result, but at the end of the day, I guess it's all learning. And when we talk about learning, when I put my legs up for the first time, I didn't like the end result. This ended up with me cutting the tacks off and pulling the legs down entirely and doing it again for a second time the next morning. So what you're watching now is me doing this for the second time correctly. Being the fact that this is a fabrication bench, I'd like it to be somewhat level, so I'm using a straight edge to make sure that these legs have perfect 90-degree angles when I put them on. Yeah, that'll do. Because I had done this before, there was a little bit of excess material on the legs themselves. You'll see me time to time use a grinder to remove it. I'm constantly checking my angles and the level on top of me, making sure everything is going to plan. With the first 2 of our legs on, we could go towards the second set. I use a steel wire brush as opposed to a grinder to clean my slag, just because it was a little bit easier for me. You may have noticed that before I do my welds, I'm putting strong tacks in all of my legs. I'm doing this so just in case I have to force anything or bend anything back into place, I could do it and it's not impossible as opposed to it would be with a full weld. Again, excess material on my leg that I now have to remove from a rush night before. Doesn't work with women and it won't work with metal. Don't be like me, put a guard on your grinder. This is a sure way to cut yourself right to the bone. It's important that these legs have a flush fitting, so that's why I'm removing all this material, but I wouldn't have had to do this if I didn't rush the first time. So again, another tip for you, don't rush, don't be a jackass. I actually think, looking back on this leg, I may have done this one a slight degree or 2 off, but in the end the table ended up being level, so it wasn't too much of a big deal. Good as a stankin' steak sandwich on a sunny Sunday. Super. This weld specifically, I feel like I would have definitely gotten better penetration if I held the electrode just a little bit longer. But again guys, in this situation it's all live and learn. The only time you're ever going to get better is if you watch your mistakes and try and construct off of them. Which, to be honest, is a reason why I love making these videos, so you guys can watch me make stupid mistakes so you don't have to go ahead and make them yourself. This is the hardest position for me, a butt weld against gravity, but I found a trick is to follow the gravity with the electrode and feed enough material that you're filling the entire butt at the same time. Let's quickly change the subject off of filling butts with material. Tell me what you guys prefer in the comments. Would you rather watch me work from a high up angle like this, or the close up angles that I have been doing, or a mix of both? Tell me what you guys want to see me make next. My email is in my channel description, and the comments are always there too. I'm open to making just about anything, and if I don't know how to make something, I'll learn how to do it and teach you guys how to too. This is where having those fittings flush is super important, so I'm going to take extra care on the top and use the grinder carefully to remove all excess material. And to answer the two questions I know you wrench monkeys out there have, yes, there was a YZ125 in the back, and yes, there will be a video on it in the future. Being careful here, making sure my top cross member is level, as well as making sure that I have the gap that I need to weld. You may have noticed that the cross member ends up sitting exactly 3/16 of an inch off of the inside of the legs. I'm doing this to compensate for the sort of rounded center that the angle piece has to ensure that there's a flush fit. Looking back at this though, a better option may have been to take a grinder and remove that sort of rounded edge on the inside of the angled steel so it has a 90-degree lip to sit on the legs with. It was right here I realized that my back left leg was off a couple degrees in the opposite direction the desk was facing. I knew this right away because the gap between the cross member and the front left leg was around 1/4 of an inch as opposed to the other one on the other side when it should have been flush. My answer to this was I used a ratchet strap from one set of legs to the other, pulling the back left set sort of in and to the right a tiny bit and then tacking it all together while it had that sort of tension on it. I suppose I could have just cut a new cross member that would have reached flush to the front leg, but the idea behind this wasn't to make it flush, it was to straighten that back left leg. I do the same thing for these top bars to compensate for the rounded edge on the inside of the angled bar. I offset it by around 3/16 of an inch. Being very careful is to make sure that these are level because this is what the actual plate is going to sit on. A local steel supplier near me was selling these 8-foot by 5-foot 1/4-inch steel plates for lower than their going market price, so I didn't hesitate as I figured I would use the extra steel for a project in the future. I know a couple of you probably saw me grab the circular saw and thought to yourself, what the hell is he doing? But let me tell you, a circular saw with the right blade will cut through up to a 1/2-inch thick plate like a hot knife through butter. I'm using a 7 1/4-inch Diablo steel demon blade with 48 teeth that's actually meant for doing exactly this. As opposed to most material, where you'd let the saw do the work, here you want to apply a 5 to 8 pounds of constant pushing force to let the saw bite into the metal. I probably could have used some sort of cutting oil while doing this, but that's something for next time. I decided as opposed to my other steel top bench, where I'd bolted the plate to the frame itself, I wanted the top to be smooth, so I'm going to run 6 1-inch welds on the underside of the frame, attaching the plate to it. The reason I'm doing 6 almost big tacks as opposed to longer welds is because just in case I want to break the bench down or move it in the future, I could cut these 6 tacks and pull the plate off. The moment you've all been waiting for. So I really like the way this came out. Now I'm going to be doing a lot of welding on this table, so I'm not sure as far as the aesthetics go what I want to do yet. However, I do know for sure that the base needs a nice coat of Craftsman Red. Nicer than a seahorse smoothie on a superb Saturday. Well, we are just about nearing the end of this one. As always, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. If you like what you're watching, be sure to comment, like, subscribe. It sure as hell helps me a whole bunch. I'll see you guys next time on Ratchet and Frank TV.